passo a palavra agora para o professor Kent Mathewson, que vai apresentar em inglês, devagarinho, com explicações em espanhol.
Sí. Bueno, con permiso voy a leer mi ponencia en inglés. Mi portugués es en línea. Mi español es un poquito mejor. Y mi inglés es perfecto. Pero yo estaba pensando en la invitación y graciísimas para ese encuentro. Bueno, no sé, ¿puede oír allá? Sí. Bueno. No. Bueno. y entonces, muchísimas gracias para la invitación y para los organizadores. Yo estaba pensando primero de hacer una ponencia sobre el árbol de la familia de Sauer académico, pero en realidad, como estaba diciendo el profesor Lobato, no hay muchas ramas brasileiras en este árbol. Y entonces yo voy a leer una ponencia sobre la historia del trabajo de los geógrafos norteamericanos aquí en Brasil, que yo creo que, y voy a hablar un poquito de la escuela de Berkeley y la ecología cultural, pero en realidad la mayoría de los estudiantes de Berkeley que ha trabajado aquí en Brasil son los estudiantes de Hildegard Sternberg. Y entonces él no era estudiante de Sauer, era estudiante de un estudiante de Sauer, Richard Russell, en mi universidad de Louisiana. Entonces, muy cerca, pero no son parte de el árbol. Bueno, el título, Brasil, los geógrafos norteamericanos o el otro América Latina. This paper selectively surveys the engagements of North American geographers with Brazil as a site of research and object of study in a historical perspective. Bueno, hasta reciente, entonces Brasil no tenía un gran papel en el programa de los geógrafos norteamericanos en la literatura. Pero cuando considera que Brasil es casi 40% de la área de América Latina, tiene su economía es más o menos 40% del total, y también la población es casi 40%. Entonces, es para notar que la producción de la literatura geográfica es mucho menos de esto en la literatura de los geógrafos norteamericanos en América Latina. Bueno, empezando con la producción académica de geografía, tiene más o menos un siglo, un poquito más. Primero era en la Universidad de Harvard con William Morris Davis y sus estudiantes. Había de estos estudiantes había solamente uno o dos que tenía una conexión con Brasil, muy breve. Pero siguiendo un poquito más profundo en el siglo XIX, había la expedición Thayer, Amazonas, con Agassiz, Louis Agassiz. Tal vez algunos de ustedes saben de eso. Él era suiza y inmigrante a los Estados Unidos en los años 40 del siglo XIX. Y también era un protégé de Alejandro von Humboldt. Bueno, nunca de las docenas de los en la expedición tenía un entrenamiento en geografía que incluyó William James, el famoso geólogo y filósofo. Era muy joven en este. Bueno, Agassiz tenía interés en dos cosas, ictiología y también para probar una teoría de él que había un periodo glacial ¿era Sierra? Sí. Bueno, voy a leer un poquito en inglés aquí. Agassiz also sought confirmation of his theory of a global ice age to refute Darwinian evolutionism and ethnographic evidence of the alleged degenerative effects of miscegenation. Agassiz was a complex mix himself of contradictory positions and opinions on scientific, social, and religious questions. On some, he parted company with Humboldt, and others found support in Ritter. His racialist observations on life and lineage in the Brazilian tropics anticipated later racialist and environmental determinist currents in North America. And I might distinguish here between racialist and racist. Racismo is a emotive, non-irrational sentiment, whereas racialism at least purports to have a scientific basis. His racialist observations on life and lineage, as I've said, in the Brazilian tropics anticipated later racialist and environmental determinist currents in North American geography. I could also add, as Professor Lobato said, Sauer countered the environmental determinist tendencies in North American geography in 1925 with his morphology of landscape. And, of course, Franz Boas was a major opponent of racism, scientific racism. Between 1870 and 1910, there were very few periodicals in U.S. geography. There were only 2 or 3, and very few articles on Brazil. No. Adelante. Yeah. Here we go. Agassiz. Yeah. Bueno. Two of William Morris Davis's students did write articles. One was Robert de Courcy Ward on a trip from Rio to Sao Paulo and in Paraná State, and a discourse on Brazil's conditions and prospects by the Reverend George Chamberlain, a U.S. Presbyterian missionary. Mark Jefferson's early work was focused on southern South America, and in 1918 he was enlisted by Isaiah Bowman, yet another Harvard-trained Latin Americanist, as part of the war effort in World War I to survey European immigrant colonies in Argentina, Brazil, and Chile. Several publications on Brazil resulted, including one on the American Confederado colony in Sao Paulo. During the 1920s, there was a scattering of publications by U.S. geographers on Brazil. Starting in the 1920s and continuing to the 1950s, no, no, we're going back into time. We've already been there. No, we want to go forward. I'm sorry. We want to go forward. Yeah. Yeah. Go on forward. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Confederado. Okay. Yeah. Go on. Una más. There we go. Among the North American geographers in this period, one figure, Preston James, came to personify and direct Brazilianist geography. James was yet another product of the Harvard geography program with a BA and an MA, and studied with Ward, but he left Harvard to study with William Wallace Atwood at Clark. His dissertation on the geographic factors in the development of transportation in South America was based on experience and material he collected in 1921 through a lengthy circuit of South America, down the West Coast, over the Andes, up to Brazil and home. Brazil was to become his main regional focus for the rest of his career. He replaced Carl Sauer, actually, at Michigan in 1923. Sauer left the University of Michigan at Ann Arbor to go to Berkeley in 1923. But Preston James did not get back to Brazil until his first sabbatical in 1930-31. As David Robinson has observed, key countries in Hispanic America were already taken. Sauer was already working, and many of his students, in Mexico. Argentina was Platt. Peru, Isaiah Bowman. So, looking around, Brazil was open for the colonization of Preston James. A number of publications resulted from this field season, 1930-31. He originally had intended to do a land use zonation study of Pará's hinterland. But that did not pan out. That did not work out. So he did a block-by-block study of land use in Rio and Sao Paulo, following his earlier studies of Vicksburg, Mississippi. Other urban studies followed, as well as rural ones. He returned in 1938 for his next sabbatical. This time, he intended to do a chorological or a regional study of southeastern Brazil, but it was not funded. Instead, he received money for a study of foreign colonists, principally Germans. Just as Mark Jefferson's ABC, Argentina, Brazil, Chile survey in World War I, James was directed to find out about potentially troublesome elements in Brazil's hinterlands. So really, a military focus with the possibility of problems with Germans with the approaching World War II. World War II disrupted James's academic research, but put him at the head of the Latin American section of the OSS. The OSS was the Office of Strategic Services, the forerunner of the CIA, their geographic division. Most North American geographers during World War II were either drafted or joined the intelligence services. Sauer did not. I'm not sure of all the reasons, but he was a little older. He avoided that. During this time, James continued to deepen and widen his network. After the war, he moved to Syracuse, where he stayed for the rest of his career. In 1949, he returned to Brazil for 18 months as a consultant to the Conselho Nacional de Geografia to help develop professional geography in Brazil. He led field trips and taught courses. A primary focus was on the Northeast that was beginning to be seen as a problem. The region and a potential laboratory for economic and social development. James's place as the preeminent U.S. Brazilian geographer was sealed with the publication of his regional text, Brazil, 1946. Despite his government and non-government connections, both in the United States and in Brazil, his prominent place within the U.S. geographic establishment, he did not build an enduring Syracuse school of Brazilianist geographies. And this is in contradistinction to Sauer building a Berkeley school, primarily focused on Mexico, but also other parts of Latin America, but not Brazil. 3 of his doctoral students completed dissertations on Brazil: Fasol, Rothwell, and Kempton Webb. By comparison, 16 of Sauer's doctoral students pursued his own students, not the future generations of them, pursued Latin Americanist careers. I should say that probably in this study of the academic tree, about 500 now of Sauer's descendants, hijos de, filios de Sauer, have done Latin Americanist dissertations. Both Fasol in Brazil and Webb at Columbia went on to be prominent practitioners of Brazilianist geography. By the 1960s, not only had chorology, regional geography, come under sustained attack from the advocates of the new spatial analytical methods and perspectives, but new programs and departments had emerged, along with new funding sources for supporting foreign research. And advance it? Oh, you already have, okay. I'm sorry, since I'm not reading this word for word, I'm out of phase with these numbers. I'm not paying enough attention there. So that helped Brazilianist geography. In some ways, the late 1950s through 1973, as David Harvey will tell us, were the golden age of U.S. area studies. Brazilian Portuguese was granted critical language status under the National Defense Education Act, and fellowships followed. Latin American study centers at select universities were established. Many of the new U.S. Brazilianist geographers were aided with these programs. At Columbia, Webb, in concert with the anthropologist Charles Wagley, turned their center towards Brazilianist research. Other key figures, yes, advance it. Here we go, okay. Other key figures of Brazilianist geography at this time, the other key figure was Hildegard O'Reilly Sternberg. Brazilian-born Sternberg received PhDs in both Brazil and the United States at my university, and taught in Brazil and Rio until 1964, and his students are in the audience, and his grandchildren are in the audience. And then moved to Berkeley. At Berkeley, he formed an important node of Brazilianist research. There, he directed 6 PhD and 6 master's degrees, including those of Nigel Smith, Susanna Hecht, Robert Vokes, and Brian Godfrey. And they continue to be the most active. In Spanish, Nigel Allen en Amazonas con su biogeografía, uno de los primeros para hablar sobre Tierra Preta. Susanna Hecht, many books, perhaps best known for The Fate of the Forest with Alexander Coburn. very well-known leftist journalist. Robert Vokes, Ethnobotanica, did very good work in Bahia, Condomblé, and Brian Godfrey, Urbanization in Amazonia. Sternberg's career spanned 70 years of teaching, research, and writing. His primary focus was on human-environment relations, especially the Amazon. Perhaps his most enduring work will be his now classic study of the floodplains of the lower Amazon. Let's see. Next one, I think. Nope. No, go back. Getting ahead here. There we go. Awi o homem na Varseia do Carreiro. Más ou menos. This was originally the title and topic of his 1956 Brazilian dissertation. Okay, we're getting close to the end, close to the present. I'll read a little bit quicker here. Up to the decade of the 1970s, U.S. Brazilianist geography fell into several molds. Regional description, most in the southeast and northeast, land use patterns, both rural and urban, commodity studies, especially coffee, economic development surveys, physical studies of landforms and climate. Starting in the 1970s and continuing to the present, there has been a dramatic expansion of new topics and themes, with some accretion suggesting formation of new minor traditions. One early radical departure from the regional paradigm was the diffusion of quantitative spatial analysis. Okay, the Brian Berry slide. By British and U.S. geographers in Brazil. Key figures such as Peter Haggett and Brian Berry helped introduce the new approaches that were enthusiastically adopted by Brazilian geographers, but not much pursued by the North American Brazilianist geographers. Perhaps the largest departure from the pre-1970s work has been the sustained interest by U.S. geographers in Amazonia, primarily involving questions of human-environment relations, the cultural ecology that Professor Lobato was talking about. This work generally takes ecological approaches, whether cultural, historical, or political, or a combination thereof. Topics include deforestation, biotic conservation, anthropic soils, terra preta, ethnobotanical traditions, and peasant subsistence strategies. Topics that once was the sole domain of Sauerian-style cultural historical study, increasingly elicit critical political perspectives, along with the analytical techniques such as remote sensing and GIS. So it's sort of become an epistemological melting pot in progress. Amazonia has become one of the most active research areas, almost a laboratory for land use, land cover change studies as well, GIS and remote sensing. Outside of Amazonia, the trajectories are less clear, but at the same time more varied. And I talk a little bit about some of the studies that are being done today by North American geographers in other parts of Brazil. Conclusions. As this is all too brief study, as I outlined, the origins of North American geographic research on Brazil can be located in a few 19th century expeditions involving only a handful of researchers. And these were largely Harvard associated. And then we have a middle period with especially Preston James, some of his students, and then more recently, I would say, in Amazonia, from ecological perspectives, whether cultural ecology, historical ecology, or political ecology. However, for this entire history, the majority of North American Brazilianist geography theses and dissertations have been more the product of a single specialist advisor rather than a school or a node. So, school's out, there's no school.